Okay. Good morning, everyone. Let's pick up. We're near the bottom of the Amud, Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, Masechet Beitza. So this now takes us to the end of our Mishnah. We're going to conclude the discussion of our Mishnah. If you just look back for a moment, so you remember, let's just refresh our memories what we were talking about. So till now we've been discussing the opening part of our Mishnah. Later on, we were talking about carrying bundles of straw, etc. And then the Mishnah said. You remember it said matchilin, the last word on daf kaftet, and it goes on matchilin b'leimat teven, aval lo ba'etzim sheba muktzeh. In other words, you have these. You have a bundle of straw. Rashi said over there, Rashi on the Mishnah said matchilin b'leimat teven. Right, lehesek. You're going to take from these bundles of straw in order to use as fuel for fire. Of course, that's why we're talking about Yom Tov and not Shabbos, meaning the principles regarding muktzeh would remain the same in this instance regarding Yom Tov and Shabbat, except that on Shabbat you can't use it for this purpose. Rashi, even though we did not designate it before Yom Tov, you didn't use this particular straw in order to put into your fire. In other words, the implication over there is that even though you hadn't set this aside, you could go and you could take it, meaning it's not muktzeh. It's not set aside in that sense. And you can use it on Yom Tov. But then the continuation of the Mishnah said, Avalo ba'etzim sheba muktzeh. We explained that muktzeh over here refers to, they would have sort of a, I guess like a shed, a storage, but behind their house. That was called muktzeh because that's the stuff you don't think about, right? Until you need it and then you can't find it. But that's something. They would keep wood in there and they would keep it there for a long time. So it says you can't take that out on Yom Tov to use. So that there the implication is. You can just see the last three words of Rashi. It says the idle muktzeh. The implication is that the Tana of our Mishnah does require muktzeh. So we have a stira. We have a stira in our Mishnah that on the one hand it says the straw that you've not designated you can take and you can use that for your fire. But on the other hand, this wood that's in your muktzeh that also you've not designated, you can't use. So do we hold, is it like Rabbi Yehudah or is it like Rabbi Shimon? That's what the Gemara is going to try and figure out. Okay, so we're on, back to our daf, right? Daf Lamed Amud Aleph near the bottom. So we say, just after the two dots, Amarav, or before the two dots, after the other two dots, right? Matchilin b'leimat teven, that's a quote from our Mishnah. So we say, Amarav Kahana, Zot omelet, matchilin ba'otzar tchila. Okay, and otzar as well is a sort of like a warehouse, like a storehouse, something that you've put in storage. So Rashi says, be'otzar bedavar ha'tzul, something that you put away for storage. Hayam muktzeh la'otzaro lezman aloch. That is muktzeh, meaning it's set aside. It's not designated for current use. It's going to be there for a long time. Generally speaking, you set it aside. One day you're going to use it to feed the animals or whatever it is. But based on this fact that the Mishnah says matchilin b'leimat teven, Rav Kahana says I can imply from Yash matzilin b'ata tchila. In other words, tchila means I can now go into this otzar and I can start using it for the first time on Yom Tov. Okay, in other words, I'm not concerned. I don't consider it to be muktzeh in that sense. So, if that's the case, mani. Who is this? Which Tana is it that holds this way? So it must be Rabbi Shimon, the late muktzeh. We say it must be Rabbi Shimon who does not have muktzeh. Now, as we've explained, and this comes up many times, when the Gemara says idle muktzeh, late muktzeh, Rabbi Shimon doesn't have muktzeh, doesn't mean that Rabbi Shimon doesn't have muktzeh at all, but it means that he's more lenient, meaning there are certain cases whereby we might consider it to be muktzeh, which Rabbi Shimon does not consider. Rabbi Shimon essentially is going to say that only things which I really have a good reason to say that I've set it aside, I'm not automatically going to set things aside to be muktzeh. It's only if I've actually gone and I know that something has been made muktzeh beforehand that it will be, but otherwise you can go and you can use it. So this otzar, he says, it's not going to be muktzeh. Right? That's Rabbi Shimon. Mani Rabbi Shimon is the late muktzeh. But now Says the Gemara, well, if that's the case, that all makes sense based on the beginning of our Mishnah. But Ema Seifa. Look now at the Seifa later on, because how does the Mishnah continue? It says, lo beitzim sheba muktzeh. It says you can take from the straw, but you can't take from these wood. So that is Atan Rabbi Yehudah, the Itle muktzeh. There follows the opinion of who? Of Rabbi Yehudah, who does have muktzeh. Meaning, right? Meaning there's a contradiction. It doesn't make sense to say the same Mishnah on the one hand says we're not concerned for muktzeh, but we are concerned for muktzeh, right? They're very, very similar cases. In one case we say it's allowed, one case we say it's not. So that seems to be contradiction in terms between Rabbi Yehudah and Rabbi Shimon. So how do we resolve it? So the Gemara is going to suggest two different ways of resolving the contradiction in the Mishnah. Okay? Option number one is to say as follows. Hacha, in our Mishnah, what are we dealing with? Right? What's the problem? When you say these pieces of wood that are muktzeh, that are set aside, that you cannot use them for firewood. So hacha ba'alze ve'ashuche askinan. This is a type of wood that's from an erez, from a cedar tree, very, very firm and very hard piece of wood. Okay, Rashi says, alze ve'ashuche ein adam misikotan domdin lebinyan. These are types of wood. You don't waste these in the fire. These is very, very good quality wood that you're going to use for building, for construction. Ashuche erez nekeva, right? That is the female form of the erez. It's the same type of tree. So that's why these are. Our question was: are you allowed to go and take these pieces of wood and to use them for firewood, or do we say they're muktzeh? So we're saying no, they're muktzeh in the sense that even Rabbi Shimon is going to agree, because this is the type of wood that you would never use for fire, you'd always use for building. And essentially, what do we say? We say the muktzeh mechamat cheslon kis. Okay, Rabbi Shimon modern. This is a category of muktzeh which is called muktzeh mechamat cheslon kis, and even Rabbi Shimon is going to agree on that. What is muktzeh mechamat chesron kis? Rashi says muktzeh mechamat chesron kis ninu shed mehen yekarin, that they are expensive. Chesron kis literally means a hole in your pocket, right? That means when things are expensive. We have different types of muktzeh. The most common type, the most lenient type, the most probably well known, so we call klisha melachto leisur, right? Again, when you talk to young kids, I often find young kids when they ask about talk about Shabbos, so they'll say something. They won't say, is this allowed or is this not allowed on Shabbos? I'll say, is this muktzeh? Right? Am I allowed to draw on Shabbos? My daughter's not asking me, is drawing muktzeh? Right? So the answer is, drawing is not muktzeh, but you're not allowed to. But why? Where does that come from? Because when you hold the pen in your hand, the pen would be muktzeh. Why? Because that is a klisha melachto le'isu. That, I think, is the most common form that we know that, intuitively, people say, what does muktzeh mean? So muktzeh means that Chazal made gzera that you can't pick up an object on Shabbos that you might use for a forbidden purpose. So a pen is a klisha melachto le'isu, because what do you do with a pen? You write with a pen. You're not allowed to write on Shabbos, even though writing is not muktzeh, but the pen is muktzeh. Okay? So therefore, that is a klisha melachto le'isu. What a lot of people don't realize is that klisha melachto le'isu is actually the most lenient form of muktzeh. Meaning, I'm allowed to, if I have a pen on my table and it's in the way, I want to now set the table for the Shabbos meal, but I forgot to move the pen before Shabbos, I can move the pen. That's what's called l'tzorach makomo, meaning I need the space, I need the place of it. I'm not interested in the pen itself, I'm interested in the place where the object is. Or l'tzorach gufo, which means if I take the object and move it for a permitted purpose. For example, on camp we used to have this question, sometimes we have these torches. You have these light, you're in a place where there's not so much light, and you have an LED light or a torch. Are you allowed to pick it up and move it different places? So the answer is that generally speaking, we would say that the light you would consider to be a klisha melachto le'isu, because turning it on and off would be forbidden. But if you're just using it to provide you light and not using it for that purpose, so that's what's called a tzorach gufo, and then you'd be allowed to move it. Okay, so that's klisha melachto le'isu, which is the most lenient form of muktzeh. A more stringent form of muktzeh is what we call muktzeh mechamat chesron kis, which is essentially where I have an object that it has a forbidden Shabbos use, but the reason it's really muktzeh is not because of that use, but it's because it's something which is very expensive. It costs a lot of money. It's very valuable. The example the Gemara gives, one of the examples it gives, is the sakin of shchita, the knife that they would use for shchita, which is very valuable and very expensive. And the point is, again, muktzeh means you don't just move things around, something that's expensive. It has its place. When the kids go and they want to pick it up and they look at it and say, "What are you doing? Put it down." Right? That's something you're worried about taking it and moving it, etc. So nowadays, a computer, maybe a cell phone might be a muktzeh mechmat chesron kis. Okay, other things as well. Wallet, perhaps. So yeah. We're saying these pieces of wood, these are muktzeh mechamat chesron kis. This is a much more stringent form. They're very expensive, and you don't want to waste them. And again, that is a more severe form of muktzeh that even Rabbi Shimon would agree with. So therefore, in our Mishnah, which is according to this teretz, we would say the following: we'd say our Mishnah goes kula according to Rabbi Shimon. So the beginning part that said that you can go and you can use the straw, right? That's fine because that's not muktzeh. But the wood we're going to say is muktzeh because that is muktzeh mechmat chesron kis because it's expensive. You would never use it for firewood. That's how it makes sense according to Rabbi Shimon. Okay. So he said, "Acham ba'avzeh v'ashuch haskin and the muktzeh mechmat chesron kis ve'afilu Rabbi Shimon modeh." So all of that was according to, again, how did we start off? We had our Mishnah. We had the statement of Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana who said that we can imply from our Mishnah that says that you're allowed to use the straw, that you can go and you can use an otsar, meaning we don't consider the otsar, the stored up objects, right, to be muktzeh. Now, we have a second girsa. We have a second version of what Rav Kahana said, which actually is a different reading of the Mishnah, and it's going to require a different teretz as well. Okay? I said a shakol before the shir started, just so nobody should suspect me. Okay, so he said as follows. We are now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the bottom of the page. Ikadamatni la aseifa. Okay, so this statement of Rav Kahana, Rashi points out, the matni la Rav Kahana, he's talking about the lot, not the first part of the section of the Mishnah, but the last part. Meaning, what did he say? And he'll say something slightly different according to this version. In other words, here, Rav Kahana is not focusing on the line of the Mishnah which is permitted, but he's focusing on the line which is forbidden. So at the end, the Mishnah said, right, lo be'itzim sheba muktzeh, that you can't go and you can't move these pieces of wood. All right, Amar Rav Kahana, zot omeret, we learn from there that we are concerned for muktzeh, and therefore zot omeret ein matchilin b'atzar tchila. According to this version, we say we would not be permitted to go and partake from the atzar in the first case on Yom Tov. So Eima Reisha Matchilin Barimatatevan, but the Reisha, the first part said that you can go from the go take from the straw, right? So Atan Rabbi Shimon, the late name. Sorry, I skipped. Right. So Amar Avkan is automatic Ein Matchilin B'Atzar Tchila. So Mani Rabbi Yehudah the Idle Muktzeh, meaning therefore it sounds like our Mishnah is following the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah, who does hold by more holds by more versions of muktzeh. But according to the previous statement of the Mishnah, that goes like Rabbi Shimon. So no. So now we say hatam betavna salia. Okay, tavna is like teven, and salia means it's a straw that has sort of rotted. It's gotten all wet and all disgusting. So Rashi says yatavna salia nirkav umasriach she'en ra'oi lema'achal be'ema. This straw, you're not going to be able to feed your animals with it because it's gotten all wet and it's gotten all masriach, right? V'stamei leitzim v'lo la'achila. And therefore, the only thing that you can do with the straw is that you can use it for firewood, essentially, and therefore it's not going to be muktzeh in this case. V'ainu la'otza. So it says the Gemara, "V'tavna saleh achazi latina." Says, because what's our point? Our question is, are you allowed to go and take this straw and use it to for whatever purpose? Are we not? Why do we say that it's not muktzeh? It's not set aside for another purpose. If there's no other purpose it can be used for, then it's not set aside for anything. It's not muktzeh. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, but you could use it for something else. It says achazi latina. In other words, it says Rashi, latit levain levanim. You could use it for cement. You could use it to make bricks. We know from the Chumash, we know from the story of Mitzrayim that they would take the straw and that's how they would construct the bricks, right? So it says you could use it for that. So it says no, the it bei kotzim. Then it's got thorns and things in it, and therefore it doesn't knead nicely, and you're not going to be able to use it for that. In other words, we have therefore two ways of resolving our Mishnah. Either our whole Mishnah is according to Rabbi Shimon, or our whole Mishnah is according to Rabbi Yehudah, right? And we explain why, even though according to Rabbi Yehudah, who does hold by muktzeh, this is an instance where something which would not be muktzeh because it can't be used for any other purpose. Okay, we now turn over the Amud. We now have a new Mishnah, very short section of the Mishnah in our Gemara, and it's going to discuss. The Mishnah says, we just have one line, top of the Amud Bet, Ein notlin eitzim min hasukah ela min hasamuchla. Okay. So here we spoke about taking out wood or taking out straw from one place. We're talking about taking from another place. We're talking here about taking wood, removing wood from the sukkah. So it says we cannot remove wood from the sukkah, but only from that which is adjacent to it. We're going to see the Gemara is going to have a long discussion. Well, not such a long discussion, but a discussion. What exactly does it mean? Hasamuchla. Now, when we talk here about a sukkah, Rashi points out immediately, we are not talking about a sukkah in the halachic sense, necessarily, that we mean on Sukkot. Rashi says, yeah, kagon Pesach or Atzeret. So not on Sukkot, or on who sits in a sukkah on Pesach, right? So we're talking about a canopy, right? Not a sukkah as the halachic version, but right, an area that you would sit under outside. So on Pesach or on Shavuot, v'yoshev b'sukkah b'gina or b'pardes. You have in your garden or out in the field, you have this sukkah. We cannot remove wood from the sukkah. Why not? We're going to see soon, right? You can take from that which is adjacent. So Rashi says the implication there is, imhu av, if the covering, the roof, the schach, right, is very thick. Shnanu kanim arbeh. That if there are lots of, meaning our understanding at first is that if there is a layer of wood that is forming the roof that you can't take away from, but if it's a very, very thick layer that you're going to remove some of the wood and there's still going to be some that's covering up, that would be okay. That's what we understand samuch to mean. But the Gemara is going to question that you are still deconstructing an ohel. By doing so, why? In other words, Rashi's already told us what the Gemara is going to say, which is that what's the problem here of taking away the wood on Yom Tov? The problem is going to be that you are destroying an ohel. Okay, if that concept does not sound familiar, it means you've not been coming to the Tzuma Rabbanan Shir, because I did not plan this, I promise, but we've been talking there about the laws of constructing and destroying ohel on Shabbat and Yom Tov, right? So if I have a roof, if I have the roof of the sukkah, which I'm now going to remove, so that is I'm destroying the ohel, I'm removing the canopy, and then that is going to be an isur on Yom Tov or an isur on Shabbat. Now, it says you can't take away from the actual roof itself, but you can take away from the schach, which is samuch. So at first, what we understand samuch to meaning that I have the basic layer that forms the roof, and then I have extra schach on top, which makes it thicker. But if I take that away, I'm not really destroying the ohel because the roof is still there. But Rashi says, wait a minute. The Gemara is going to ask, once I have all that wood is part of the roof, so that extra becomes batel, becomes nullified, it's all part of the same entity, which is the roof of the ohel, or of the sukkah in this case. And therefore, any that I take off, that is going to be soter the ohel. So that's going to be the question which the Gemara is going to address. And as a result of that question, maybe we have to refine our understanding of samuch. Maybe samuch means something a little bit different. Okay, so I know it's a little bit early, but we're going to stop there. I'm having a bit of a hard time today. My throat hurts. I have a bit of a cold. So we are going to end over there. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Have a wonderful day. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you very much for the share. Thank you.
And refer Shalema. Just vote.
Cheers.